So I got to say, first of all, that's a tough act to follow. So I was a last-minute replacement for John Kloss, who's the president of the Sudbury District Labour Council. And when I got the information about what was happening, I had sort of a checklist of what to talk about, and I misunderstood basically. I thought it was going to be a brief sort of introduction of what I think are the values, and then we'd roundtable discussion. So I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, and I thought that would help me a little bit. And then you spoke and sort of blew the doors off the room. So I really thought it was fantastic what you said, and a lot of things that I was going to speak about the Ontario Common Front, which has to do with austerity measures and poverty and callbacks and the attack on social justice. And then I reconsidered, because if you're here on a Thursday night, you probably are aware of austerity measures and how they're not very good. So I'm going to talk about what's near and dear to my heart. So I'm associated strongly with labor and with the steelworkers and with the Labour Council, and you might have seen me because I was pretty active and visible during the strike. So I believe in workers' rights, and a lot of times I get tied into a union, and I'm very proud to be union, but I spent the majority of my life non-union. My family was non-union. So most of my life was non-union. My dad worked at Inco when I was very young, and then he quit after an accident. And my stepfather works at Falconbridge, but that wasn't until years later. So when I talk about workers, I'm talking about all workers. When I talk about labor with a capital L, I'm not just talking about unionized workers. I'm talking about all workers. So my role right now is I'm the worker safety rep at the smelter in Coppercliff. And so I work in an organization with very high risks and high dangers. And I work at a plant where we've had 3 fatalities since the return from the strike. So it is difficult work, and it's dangerous work, and it's important, the role that we do. And when I reflect on what we do in terms of labor and health and safety, because it's April, I can't help but reflect on Homer Seguin, which some of you may know and others may not, and that's what affects me, is the fact that people would not know who Homer is. So the reason I'm thinking about this at this time is that we just went through the day of mourning, which was on April 28th, and this is a day where we reflect on people who have been injured or killed in the workplace, and we're talking about occupational illness and fatalities in the workplace. And Homer is a driving force of us having that in the workplace. So if I can back up many, many years, for those of you who know health and safety sort of history, Elliott Lake, they were giving the miners, they were putting the miners in this room where they breathe in aluminum, and it would coat their lungs to protect them from the radiation. And the cancer rates were skyrocketing, and the miners were complaining, and they were asking for help, and warning was going on. And so the government was saying that there is no link between what's happening to you and your cancer rates, it's just coincidental. And Homer got involved. He was a steel worker and a staff rep, and he got involved with this. And he became very knowledgeable on these sort of things, and they had registered him for a conference in France, and I'm shortening this version. And Homer, there's a story of Dr. Homer Seguin. Homer didn't graduate from high school, but he was the doctor over there. And during this conference the government was there talking about studying the cancer rates in miners. And because of the scandal being released, they had a press conference back in Ontario, and because of the scandal, it led to the Han Commission, which led to us having an Occupational Health and Safety Act. So because of somebody in Sudbury, who grew up in Sudbury, lived in Sudbury, we have an Occupational Health and Safety Act that gives workers, all workers in Ontario, the right to refuse, the right to know, the right to participate. I'm missing a right. Right to refuse, thank you. So because of work that he did, we have this, right? And particularly because he was at one time the president of my union, my role as a full-time worker safety rep, where I have the ability to work on this full-time in the plant and not part-time, that was something that he negotiated into our contract. And when you think of an industry like Inco, which is now Vale, we have a history of killing people, right? Like, let's be honest. We do our best to be safe, but since they opened, there's been over 700 deaths. So we don't do well overall. So another thing that Homer helped bring to us was our cancer center that's in the hospital. So that was, Homer was one of the driving forces. And whenever I say Homer did, I know it was a collective group, right? Because all of us here, I think, are activists to one extent to another, and we would know it isn't one person doing it, right? There's a group of people, but Homer really led the charge on all these things. So us having a cancer center in Sudbury and not having to drive to Toronto was one of the things that Homer came up with as part of his manifesto. the regreening that we have in town here, Homer was a big advocate for the soil studies and the pollution control, right? So the fact that right now, if you go outside, there's probably very little smoke coming out of the stack, 6 o'clock. I'm going to say very little smoke coming out of the stack. So there's legislation about how much we can pollute in the summertime. When I was a kid growing up here, you would breathe the sulfur, and it would make this sort of phlegm in your mouth, and you would spit. Everybody, my mom would spit, everybody would spit, and it was very common. You see how far you could spit. So we don't have that anymore. In fact, there's a rule, a very strict legislation about shutting down, and most of the smoke comes out of the smelter where I work, and I can tell you when we hit these API levels, we shut down like that. It's a very, very quick process. We don't want to pollute. And that's one of the things that Homer helped to drive, and that led to the greening. And then when I get back to the day of mourning, I'll get there in 1 second. I just want to talk about industrial compensation. So Homer lied about his age to get hired. His father died when he was younger. He had to support the family. He lied about his age to get on at Inco, and he worked at the cinder plant. And the cinder plant basically is like working in a dust bowl. And from being exposed to that, he got cancerous tumors, which ultimately he died the weekend of the day of mourning. But because of Homer's involvement with that, and because of knowing how it affects you and the fear you have, if you can imagine, you're into the senior years of your life and you have a disease, so you know that your days are numbered, and you don't know if you're going to be able to take care of your family or provide for your family or leave anything for your family, or if your medical bills and your cost of living because of what you need to survive and to make it through the day is going to be a drain on the family. And so Homer did a lot of fighting for the dignity of workers who were in this position, and not just steel workers, but workers across the board, and to the point where he was recognized at Laurentian University and given an honorary doctorate for his work in there. And so circling back to the day of mourning, and the reason I have this on my mind, having just gone through the day of mourning, that was an institution that started here in Sudbury. So there's a long debate about who started it, and I'm a steelworker, so I'm going to say that we did. But I know that we had a hand in starting it for sure, and I know that Homer was a part of having that, and it was about getting the recognition of what is happening to people out there. And the slogan for it is to mourn for the dead and fight for the living, and if it's off media, it's always fight like hell for the living. But what's important is that we think about what we're doing, and we think about how to get safer and how to eliminate these fatalities, and especially the ones that you don't see, right? Because if you're being polluted, if you're breathing in contaminants and you're breathing in carcinogenics, you don't see it the same day like if you had cut your finger or been crushed or had a muck pile land on you, right? You don't see it for years and years later. And there's a strong focus on that, and I think as someone who lived in Sudbury all of my life, and I'm proud to be a Sudburian, I think it's important that we know that this is something that started in Sudbury and that it's spread, and now it's in 200 countries around the world. So when I think about grassroots media and what's going on in the media, and questions about, do government decisions reflect my values, and does media in general reflect my values and what I want to see, I gotta say I find it lacking. So if you're like me and you're hearing the story about Homer for the first time, you're probably surprised because we have a Jim Gordon boardwalk, and we have a Tom Davies Square and a Lionel Malone Center. And I'm not saying that those people don't deserve to have their names on things, but I think that Homer has contributed a lot to our society, not just in Sudbury, but in Ontario, and probably it's rippled beyond Ontario throughout Canada. And when you think of the day of mourning, it's rippled beyond our country into other continents. And as a Sudburian who's lived here and is proud of being in Sudbury, I didn't know anything about Homer until I was about 37 years old, which is wrong. And that's one of the things that I see is missing when I see things not reflecting. I see a lot of news on TV about celebrities, and I see a lot about the stock market. And it's gotten to the point where I get concerned because we know a lot about celebrities. We know about Bennifer and all these little cliche things. I know all about these Kardashians, who I have no idea what they do. But every day they're in the news and on the front page of some newspaper or magazine. But I really don't know people beyond a block from my house, what their name is and what they do for a living. And we've gotten away from the things that I value and I find important. And that's why in my introduction I asked about the importance of dignity of labor. For some reason we've glorified people who are day traders in stock markets and people who make money by moving paper. But there is no dignity for the person, like the farmers. And there is no dignity for the people who are blue collar workers or white collar workers or public sector workers. it seems like it's embarrassing if you just want the Canadian dream, right? If all you want in your life is to have a happy life and maybe help your kids grow up and then help support them when they want to move on to what they're doing, that seems like you've lowered the bar too low, right? Unless you're going for millions and making more and more money. And at the end of the day, and the push behind that impulse is almost a propaganda message about let's defund everything else. Let's let the market decide. And I had a recent discussion with somebody about the CBC and cutting the funding for the CBC, and they were saying how expensive it is. And I was trying to make the argument that the importance of the CBC and having a media collective that isn't influenced by corporate funding is essential to us, and it's important to us the same way that having parks is important and having roads are important to us. We need to have information with us. And one of the things I thought about while writing down some notes about what I want to talk about was, in terms of media, when I think about what's a reliable source of media for me, it's changed drastically in the last 4 years to social media. I'm more reliant on what I find on the internet and what people are sharing with me, and I know you have to take that with a grain of salt and you have to look into it and make sure it's accurate, but there are movements like the student protest in Montreal that are not getting coverage, and like Occupy Sudbury that was not getting coverage, and Occupy Wall Street for months wasn't getting coverage, and what was happening in Wisconsin with the workers was not getting coverage. And because it's not getting coverage, people aren't being informed, or if they get coverage, it's a slanted, really slanted media coverage. We've sort of lost touch with journalism in terms of corporate media. And it becomes the corporate perspective of what's right and what's wrong, and it feels Orwellian to a certain extent. And that concerns me because I want to be able to make up my mind and make decisions. I don't want my decision always to be right, but I want to be able to voice my opinion, and I want to hear the voice of other people's opinions. And I want to make sure that what's important to other people I'm hearing about so I can learn and grow as a person. And that's being eroded and washed away. I don't have a closing remark, but I do want to acknowledge again that there are many people out here doing great work, and a lot of people in this audience doing great work. And I'm a big supporter of the stuff that you do in terms of social justice and movement. So thank you very much.